I'm Julie James, Artistic Director of Jewel Theater Company. Welcome to our interview with David Arrow. Hello, David.
Hello.
David wrote and performs Kennedy, Bobby's Last Crusade, which we are presenting as a lead up to the presidential election. Besides being a powerful play about Bobby Kennedy's 1968 presidential campaign, we hope it will help inspire dialogue about politics and the state of our nation. We also offer it as a way to promote voting. Please make sure you are registered and vote by mail or vote in person on November 3rd. Now, back to Kennedy. David performed his show in an off-Broadway production just 18 months ago, and I've been looking forward to presenting it at Jewel right at this time. Fortunately, David was able to film the show this summer on a stage, but without an audience, allowing us to still present it, even though we're not able to do it in person with you. And I'm especially excited about bringing you this show because David is part of what I call Jewel Theater's family of actors. You most recently saw him last season in Breaking the Code. And before that, he appeared in our productions of Woman in Mind and Enter the Guardsman. Some of you may also recall seeing David at Shakespeare's Santa Cruz in Burn This some years back, and he's got a very long list of other wonderful credits that include ACT and Aurora Theater in our area, but many theaters across the nation and in New York and off-Broadway, not to mention all of his film work. For our talk today, here is Susan Myers-Silton, who will be conducting the interview. Susan is wearing her dramaturg hat today, but she is also a director with Jewel as well, and many of you have seen the plays that Susan has directed for us. Hi, Susan.
Hi, Julie. Hi, David.
Hi.
I'm so pleased to be a part of this, and having seen your wonderful production brought up questions for me that I thought our audiences would like to get answers for.
I hope I can do that. I hope I can live up to Julie's introduction.
Yes, well, you already have. You being part of the family, you're extraordinary actor. I will never forget Alan Turing. It was wonderful. You were wonderful.
I agree.
So how did you prepare to play RFK?
Well, I got introduced, actually, I did there's another one-person show about Robert Kennedy called RFK by Jack Holmes, and I was asked, I don't know if you guys know, Peter Callender, who he and I worked together on something, and we had a great time working together, and we were jokingly talking about what are we going to do next, as that happens in every dressing room, at the end of a run when you've had a good time working with someone. And we kind of jokingly said, let's do a play about maybe Jack Kennedy or Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King. And we started playing around with ideas of which, it was a lot of talk and nothing really came of it. But then San Jose Stage Company asked me about this play about Robert Kennedy. And I asked if I was interested in a one-person play. And boy, was I scared, and because it's a huge undertaking. And
that's a play called RFK.
That's a play called RFK. But I also thought one of my favorite quotes actually of Bobby's is only those who dare to fail greatly can ever hope to achieve greatly. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, I have to try this. And so I did that production about 5 years ago. And so that was my introduction really to the sort of theatrical possibilities of Bob Kennedy. And so that's when I started doing a little bit of research on how to, so this is going back to the question about playing him, and watching videos and his physical behavior, his voice, obviously. I was conscious then, and even more, or in my play, to not really try to do an imitation. I didn't want to be Rich Little doing Bobby Kennedy. And there are a lot of kind of funny, wonderful spoofs on him. But I wanted to be more like Alan Turing was not there is a real Alan Turing, and but and I did things that I believed that were true to him, but not necessarily an imitation to him. And I did the same thing with Bob. I wanted to bring a familiarity that people have. I wanted to make me feel like him, but I was trying to play a character in a play, not necessarily be a complete imitation. But it was through that research that led me into, in fact, eventually, I'm sure you'll ask how I got into writing the play, but I'll let you ask it first. But it was that, so I did a lot of watching, hearing, listening to his speeches, listening to him speak in a number of recordings where he wasn't giving an actual speech, and his vocal pattern is actually quite different then. Like a lot of people, when you perform, either through nerves or for whatever reason, you speak differently.
Yes. Yes. You captured his essence.
Well, that was the goal. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes. As you did with Alan. And by doing so, by making sure that you weren't an imitation, you went away from caricature and captured who he truly was inside, which is something that struck me because I felt that you had an intimacy, that you showed us his innermost thoughts and feelings and his insights. What helped you to get inside him and find those?
Again, I think it was the research. I mean, the singularly most amazing quality about him, and he had so many attributes and things that made who he was, made up of what made him who he was. But the thing that struck me most, and the thing that made me compelled to him, was his empathy and his amazing ability to feel what others, I mean, true empathy, really, and particularly with children, to absorb their feelings, their pains, and that's what made him really who he was. And a lot of people have thought that was an evolution of his personality. Most people who knew him well, particularly family members, said it was always part of him. The evolution was really that as he learned more and as he was exposed to more, that empathy just broadened. So he was not as empathetic with a particular issue until he was confronted with it. And then when he was, that empathy made him change course often in his personal and political life.
You went right into my question, which was what inspired you? In fact, you answered it in two parts. First, the conversation in the dressing room, and then his empathy.
Well, that makes you think. The research I had done for the other play was really a biographical play.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned a lot about him, the person. One of the books I had read was called The Last Campaign, which was specifically about the campaign, and I found that to be a very compelling book. But there was a play about Robert Kennedy out in the world, and I didn't think there needed to be another one until it stemmed really out of 4 years ago during the presidential election that in 2016, and my disappointment, I guess. I was couching that word a little bit, but my disappointment in the rhetoric of the political, actually with both, even the parties I agreed with, the lack of personal responsibility. It was, this is happening, we can do it, we'll fix it, but no sense of challenging the electorate themselves to be a participant in the health and welfare of the country, and that obligations that we have, not necessarily to be part of government, but to be part of society.
Mhm.
And that Kennedy spoke incredibly well uh, toward to that. And then I started thinking, well, yeah, let me look. I want to go back and look at some of those speeches, because they were not only what just was his language so much more compelling, and but boy, what he was talking about in 1968 is what's happening right now. I think even more right now than when I started the play in the summer of 2017. Um, and then all of a sudden, the idea of not a biographical play, but about Bob Kennedy, the what he wanted for America in that very short time of during his run for the presidency, and that particular journey, his last crusade, that there was a play there using the speeches to be the trigger point to move the story forward, and then the opportunity to offset the speeches with really what was going on inside of him, while that real huge contrast between the real public persona and the still insecure and questioning, insecure in that I don't he was secure in many ways, but he didn't, he felt this obligation. uh, he didn't know that this was never his path. It was
Yeah.
the family's path, and he had to pick up the banner and take it on, and he never felt quite at home with that until really, I think he does get there. And even, I mean, that's, I think, not only what my play tries to show, but also the reality of the fact that um, the lines I say at the end of the play are close to really what he said.
Yeah. It it's wonderful to hear you talk, because what you've done is brought in all the different points that I wanted you to make, and you've made things come full circle for me. This idea of his empathy, and then his sense of social responsibility, and his desire to communicate it to the people who were listening. It all ties together, and it also ties into the structure of the play, which you talked about, which is essentially a conversation with himself, with his listener, and then you intersperse pieces of his speeches. So, what I wanted to do was have you talk about the writing and workshopping process, and how you came to that particular structure. And then, as part of it, how did the final project differ, if it did in any way, from your initial
It
concept?
differs now. I'd like to change a line today. Uh, it's theater is always growing. It gets published. This play is published, so I'm kind of locked down to that. But I even, after filming this version, I called the publisher and said, "Can I make a few changes?" And they did. Because it's not ever quite finished. At some point, you have to let it go, or say, "Well, next time we'll come around to that." So the impetus was the political rhetoric, and how Bob's was so much more compelling, and then I thought, well, what was the first speech he gave after his announcement? And I read that, and it's one of the longer speeches that I give in the play, and it was so amazing to me, about, again, speaking about now, that I said, oh, this isn't a play about Bob in 1968. This is a play about the political issues of today. I can write a play about today that is really under the guise of a political play from 1968 from a famous person. But what I'm writing about really is the struggles we're having right now, struggles with race, inequities, and economic inequities, racial inequities, healthcare, all these things that Bob was championing. And I, as I was assembling it, I also thought, it was, sometimes I got depressed that, boy, this is 50 years ago, and here we're still fighting this.
Yeah.
And then other days I would say, no, this is actually optimistic. It's 50 years and we haven't let go either. We haven't stopped fighting. So you can kind of look at it both ways, and I tend to look at it both ways, intermittently. So that was the beginning. So that first speech, I looked it up. I have a book of his speeches, but then I also looked up the exact speech, the full speech, online. A lot of them are at the JFK Library, and I thought, oh, okay. So if the play starts with this and goes to the inevitable end, what can I say about that journey and our journey now? That was the impetus. I then just I would get a speech, and then I knew when the next speech might have been, and I looked to see, well, that one's sort of, he just said what he said last time, so I can't say that again. So I looked at the next really interesting thing and put that there, and then I would kind of improvise. I knew what had happened between when he gave that speech on March 24th and this one on April 5th or something. So I would, or April 4th was the big day, of course, in the campaign. But so I would then, I knew the things that had happened, and I would try I had Bob's voice in my head, and I said, well, how, if I'm telling someone what happened between, well, like you might, I said, well, yesterday I had lunch at the diner, and then I went over here and I went there, and then I sort of started doing it that way, and then wrote down what I thought was interesting, and then I had a little bit of a blueprint, and then it was just scrubbing and cleaning and making better. And the speeches, of course, they're verbatim in terms of, I don't make a single word up. Of course, I don't give every single part of the speech. Speeches were often 20 minutes long, but I edit them. I don't play with the order of what he said. I don't move a paragraph from behind and front. I wanted to be, I had a sort of real sort of purist rules that I set for myself. But within that confine, I edited a lot. So I'm taking out, often 80% of a speech and distilling it to what I thought was going to move the story forward, or what we'd already heard, so we don't need to hear that again. And so that's how I pulled it together. And I was trying to remember as I was talking all that long part question. But so then I brought it to a writers group, and a writers group that I'm part of. And I felt, well, I'm an actor. Why am I in this group in the first place? I better bring them something. So at least now I finally had something to share. And I thought I had really, worked it down a lot. And I started reading, and after about an hour and a half, I realized I still had 2/3 of the play left. So it was a 2.5 hour, almost 3 hour first draft. And it's now an hour and a half. So there was a lot of material that then had to be lost and lost and lost. And even when I did the hour and a half, if I just read it version, our first rehearsal went an hour and 50 minutes. So I still had to lose 20 minutes out of it.
Wow.
Part of that was, you don't have to allow for now running around the stage and all the overacting I was playing. So,
if I could interject, I love what you said. It really is amazingly timely, and what you said about that it can look like, boy, we're still, haven't we learned anything? But I liked how you said that it means it's still important. It's an important thing to
we haven't let go.
Right,
we haven't let go of these issues, and we still are important.
That's right. And there's a lot of us out here, I think that, I don't know, I won't say how old I was when Kennedy was doing his thing, but not old enough to be aware of politics in general, let alone who was running for president. But, and now like so many of us, I hadn't really paid much attention in years past, but in the last few years, I've gotten hyper obsessed with politics and all of that. And so for someone like me to then go back and look at what someone like Bobby said, and all the others and people who have passed away recently, like John Lewis and
John Lewis was with Bob at many of those campaign events, and he was there on the last day of the campaign.
Yeah. Well, my point that I'm getting to in a very long-winded way is that it really is, it's not dated, it's not old, it's inspiring, and it's just opens a world for me, and it's just amazing how timely it is, and helps to motivate, I think, a lot of us to think in ways that maybe we weren't thinking of before.
Again, that was the reason to write it. If you can't, plays, even when we often talk about why Shakespeare is still relevant, because of his incredible connection to the human condition, which doesn't change. But they are relevant to us because those are the things that still happen in people still is ongoing. Historical plays, sometimes it's because that point in history reflects on a point of history now, and in this case is a little bit the same. But I really wanted to write a play that was about today, or at least to make us think about today.
Right. Which you did. You succeeded, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, you did. And to have a perspective of not what's going on right now, but what did go on, is so much more of a teaching moment, because it stimulates that comparison, and it doesn't make anything preachy, or it doesn't try to give you a point of view. It brings you to a place where this actually happened. And that's one of the reasons I think that it succeeds, is that you took it and you pulled out what you wanted to communicate, and you found it, but you also found it in an intimate way, which my next question was about what governed your choices of the personal moments you spoke about, the actual words in the speeches. And I think you've answered that. What I loved was the definition of him through his words, through talking about his family, things like that, because we know his children. Mm-hmm. They're in politics, they're in the world. We know what he did to help make them who they are. And you talked about all of that. It wasn't this straight political biography. It was this person in all of his complexity and his totality. So anyway, I saw that you were wanting to react to that, so please do.
No, just saying, about his kids, I think they, many of them, particularly the boys, really suffered from his loss.
Yeah.
The older boys most, and of course his son David, who I mentioned in the play because of a unique experience that happened the day of the California primary, and David never got over that moment with his dad, when his dad saved his life from the ocean, and that kind of haunted him for a long time, and he succumbed to drug abuse, and finally, not an official act of suicide, but he lost. Sirhan killed more than one person that night.
Yeah. Yes, that's a tragedy because he was a very engaged father.
Yeah, yeah.
So, how did the experience of creating this play and performing it change you?
I'm so much more egotistical now. I cannot, I am barely tolerable even when looking in the mirror. Um, I, I don't know if uh, well, it's opened up another avenue of expression for me. As I had written a little bit before. I had written one other play, but I considered myself a playwright, and that was it. Uh, I'm I make, I have ideas for things. I've written some film stuff. I had dabbled, but I don't think like a writer. I have a lot of writer friends. I think like an actor, and my approach to writing this was through an actor's. I have storytelling ideas, I think, that are like writers, but I don't have that. Um, uh, it was through the acting of it that really was the the push for it. But it's been a wonderful experience to be, uh, to have something more of my own to do and now share.
Mhm.
Um, so I think, and also just doing a one-person show is a kind of, it's a marathon for an actor, and that requires training. Even doing it for film, it required me, building my vocal stamina, all the tools that an actor tries to bring to the stage, are, including just the memorization of it all. Alan Turing yapped for 2.5 hours pretty much nonstop, and I think if I hadn't done a one-person show, I don't know that that would have maybe scared me to death to pick up a play like that.
This makes me think. I can see how writing a play, you need to have that vision, the big idea of the whole thing, and it makes me think when I directed you. This is going back a few years when we did Woman in Mind, and the great conversations that we had. You were very you tried to tread softly, to have a conversation with the director, but I welcomed it, and I can tell then, and I can tell working with you, just watching you on stage and talking with you, David, personally, that you definitely have this a really keen sense of the bigger picture, which I think is helpful as a director, but also obviously as a playwright. So I can see that would have served you well here.
I think unfortunately um, it's not a thing that people try to teach actors. But I had a wonderful mentor. I wanted to be an actor when I was not yet 12. Seriously wanted to be an actor. And a then mentor of mine, who was a professional director, said, all right, I'm going to teach you how to build a flat. I'm going to teach you how to focus and hang lights. I'm going to teach you how to design a set. And then that was incredibly useful. I learned from another mentor, as he was talking about working. He had worked as a costumer for Judith Anderson. No, sorry, Agnes Moorehead, who had a one-person show, and I remember him telling me that she would go in and toured colleges, and she would walk in the stage and go, that gel is the wrong color, and that made me think about the kind of attention to the world you're in informs you as an actor. Doesn't mean that it's not my job to change that gel, or necessarily to really say point it out, but knowing what the world where I am. People joke about me. I remember doing, Kirsten always joking about where I could find the light.
Kirsten, who directed Breaking the Code.
Yeah, I mean, a good actor should be like a moth. just knowing the world you're in. And yes, I think having some of those early skills gave me a little more confidence to say, maybe I can write this.
Yeah.
But I started writing it going, this may be a bunch of crap, but at least I have something to do with right now while I'm waiting for someone else to call me up and offer me a job.
Well, you did that something else. So beautiful. I have a final question. Feel like I'm a talk show host. This is your final question. What would you like your audiences to take away from this?
That's a great question, and I think Julie actually said it. It's the kind of it. I think Bob's words, Bob's actions can be inspiring, and I hope that people are inspired to be a bigger and better part of their communities. As I said earlier, it doesn't mean that they should be that everyone has to be involved in politics. It doesn't. I mean, when John Kennedy said, "Ask not what your country can do for you," that was not. I think that should not have ever been taken literally. But it does mean that we are part of things, and if that just means it means voting, as Julie said. It means being a participant in the life of your community, and right now, part of that, the community that we mostly are part of, that the theater community is, we're completely taken away from here we are on Zoom, and the things but being part of, if you're most of the people who are going to be watching this play are supporters of the Jewel Theater, and that is being part of your community, being engaged with the artistic life of the community, the social life of the community. It doesn't matter what party you vote for, but just being, it's knowing what's going on, being aware, and knowing that you can be inspired to do better. And I think that's what Bob was kind of about for himself. He thought he could be better. And the words he used, particularly when they were off the cuff, like the night of April 4th, 1968, where it's probably one of the greatest political speeches in the world, and it could have been given the night after George Floyd was murdered. It could have been given the night after the Rodney King verdicts. It could have been given, and those, but the inspiration and to be a bigger part of your community. That if people walk out of the theater, turn their computer off in this case, feeling like, boy, I'm inspired, that would be my hope. And I hope they have a good time.
And there is humor.
Yes, he's funny.
He is funny, and the way he looks at the world is wonderful and humorous. And as anyone knows, you need a little humor to get through the worst times. And
he didn't take himself so seriously that he couldn't make fun of himself.
He had a lot of humility,
do that.
for sure.
Sorry?
Humility. It was one of the wonderful.
It's tough to be, to run for president, you must have a super ego. And yet to be, and that balance of humility and ego is really kind of a compelling character trait, and what makes him, I think, a theatrical character.
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
Well, so I guess we've come to the end of our interview. That was wonderful. Again, I'm so happy that we're able to present this show, because it looked for a while like maybe we wouldn't be able to with the pandemic around. But so I'm so glad that you got to film it and I'm happy to be presenting it to our patrons, who I'm sure will enjoy it as well. And so thank you so much for joining us today from New York. You're in New York right now, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we've got our little branding there. But anyway, and thank you, Susan, so much. That was a wonderful set of questions.
Thank you both.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm again very happy to be part of it.
Great. All right. We'll see you, I hope, in person someday soon.
Yes, I hope so too.
Great. All right. Bye-bye.